Hi, I'm here today to talk to you about conflict theory. Basically, what conflict theory says is that human behavior, particularly in a social context, is influenced by or results from conflicts between competing groups. Um, this theory was originated by Karl Marx in the mid 1800s, and he believed that the conflicts arose between two main classes or groups of people. Those two classes were the bourgeoisie, which are the people that own the means of production. In other words, people who own a factory or own a large Fortune 500 company or even a smaller company, just people who own the tool that they use to make money. Um, and the other group is the proletariat, which are the people who don't own those things, the people who work in the factories, the people who work for the other companies. Marx believed that these two classes are always in conflict. He believed that the upper class, or the bourgeoisie, exploit the lower class, or the proletariat, for their own economic gain. He said that resources were unjustly distributed and that this kind of conflict was always inherent in a capitalist system. So, any kind of system where you are buying and selling, relying on economic machines, basically, like the big companies, you're going to have this kind of conflict. He believed that as the socioeconomic conditions for the workers of the proletariat got worse, that they would eventually develop something called a class consciousness. This class consciousness would be when they realized that they were being exploited or used, essentially, by this upper class for reasons that weren't directly benefiting the lower class, and that after they realized that, they would then revolt and demand changes. Marx said that unless the changes completely got rid of a capitalist system, that this conflict would continue to exist. Since Marx authored this theory, it has expanded to cover other kinds of conflict beside class conflict. It's expanded to cover things like race, gender, sexuality, basically anything that you could find where people will not always be on the same level playing field, basically. Um, Essentially, the different social groups have different amounts of power. Those with the larger amounts of power maintain their power by controlling the institutions in our society, so government, religion, schools, etc., and then promoting their messages that benefit them and help them keep their power throughout the culture of the society. And then at the same time, the groups and the people with this little power are struggling to be heard and to gain the resources that they need in a fair way. Let me give you an example to help illustrate this for you. So, kind of a current events type thing. Um, if you follow the news, you've probably heard about the Flint water crisis in Michigan. Um, Basically, what happened there was that a community was poisoned by toxic drinking water that had been polluted with lead. Um, Now, Flint is a community made up mostly of lower class people who are of minority racial groups, so those other than white. And people were starting to look at the way that exposure to things like hazardous environmental pollution is shaped by race and class. This is an example of conflict theory because those in the lower class are being exploited. Their health is being exploited. The water that they drink is poisoned and they can't do anything about it because they don't have the power that those who made those decisions that led to the poisoned water had. So, therefore, their low power is conflicting with those in the high power, and this leads to them being more likely to be exposed, to dangerous environmental pollution. And actually, after this happened, a recent study found that those who are of a minority race, so again, anything other than white, and low income. So usually anything under about $50,000, give or take, depending on the community and the area of the country that you're in. If you are in either of those groups, so typically historically low power groups, part of the proletariat, you could say, you are much more likely to be exposed to hazardous pollution because those in power, or the bourgeoisie, aren't paying attention to or maybe don't care about the effects of their actions on the people in the lower class because they're exploiting them in order to gain things for themselves. That's a pretty good recent event example of conflict theory. So, to summarize, conflict theory was developed by Karl Marx, started out in the 1800s, mid 1800s. Basically, what it says is that human behavior is influenced by or results from conflicts between competing groups. These competing groups could be race, they could be class, they could be gender, any number of groups. There could be conflict. And this conflict can result in change when the groups, especially the lower groups, realize that they are getting the worst deal. And they decide to demand change. So, thank you for watching. If you have any other questions, feel free to contact me or another Chegg tutor. Thanks.